Welcome to the Allison Loves Math podcast. I'm super excited to introduce today's guest, Gabriel Rojas. He's the author of Algebra User Manual, which is a super duper friendly introduction to algebra. Like super friendly, like it's got puppies in it. It's so friendly. And it really breaks everything down step by step. We'll talk about that more in a second. The English version of Algebra User Manual came out this last November, and the Spanish version was just released. So Gabriel is a civil engineer, graduated magna cum laude from the University of Massachusetts Lowell, and the recipient of the ASCE New Faces of Engineering Award. He's the co-developer of NetLane, a traffic device approved by NASA and Cornell University. He's a college professor, a private math and physics tutor, and a former professional soccer player. So welcome, Gabriel. I'm so excited to have you here.
Hi, Allison. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm great. I'm very happy to meet with you today. How are you?
I'm good. So I am super excited to talk to you about your algebra book. Because as I was saying to you earlier, if algebra were taught in the super friendly and simple and encouraging way that you break it down in your book, there would be no such thing as math anxiety and fear of math anymore. So anyways, I want to say that I love your book. And if you are a parent or a teacher out there watching and you've got a kid in algebra or teaching algebra, I highly recommend you check out Gabriel's book, The Algebra User Manual. So actually, maybe let's just start a little bit talking about that. How did you get to writing it? Like what inspired you to write it?
Well, so as you mentioned, I've been a math professor, okay, at college level and at tutoring all over the place. As I was mentioning, I've been tutoring to kids from like 50 different countries in the world via online, so cool. Okay? So I get to meet a lot of people, and there is something very common in learning math, which is fear of math, fear of the numbers. You look at the numbers and you're like, you start shaking, okay? I've experienced it myself because between high school graduation and college, I spent 2 years because I was playing soccer. Soccer was paying me, so I was not doing math at all. And after 2 years, when I go back to college, I'm like, do I really want to study engineering? I'm a little afraid of that, right? Yeah. So I experienced that fear. And so I realized with all this time teaching, with all this time doing math, I'm like, we need something very friendly to kids that teach them like math is nothing to fear, math. So something that helps them all over the place, that continues with them. As I was mentioning, many of the books we know, they're really good books, but they teach you something at the beginning. And when you're learning to ride a bike, they help you at the beginning, then they let you go. Okay, so that's it. Algebra User Manual is with you the entire time. So every single step, every single little detail is explained. I used the dog, as you mentioned. I used the dog as the assistant to guide you through the process. I mean, most of people like animals, so it's a dog.
I love the dog, the little dog images throughout it. What inspired that? Where did that come from?
Is one of my dogs. Okay, I've had many dogs in my entire life. I know, and I was like, and actually when I'm doing my online classes, right? Especially and this isn't something I do not only with young kids, I do with even college level stuff. When the math is getting really complicated, or when we're doing a really complex topic, I just call one of my dogs and I put it on the screen, all right? And they get distracted for a couple of seconds, they love it, and then they change their mindset for the class. I'm like, you know what? Why don't we put that on a book? Okay.
There we go.
The dog is always smiling. It has a little beanie. Okay.
Yes, it's so cute.
Sometimes you will see the dog. We have 5 different images of the dog throughout the book. Some of them has glasses, some of them is smiling.
They're so cute.
So that's it. That's the whole point. Is something that makes it actually math is not as scary. All right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's the whole point of Algebra User Manual. Is showing, helping you, guiding you, showing you hey, it's not scary. And when things get complicated, we're here for you. We're not leaving you alone.
That's perfect. I love that. And I love that it's your dog also. So you can learn algebra with Gabriel and his dog also. It's not something you can say about other math books.
Exactly. Yeah, by the way, I don't mention the name of the dog throughout the book, so you can name it whatever you want.
There you go. Even better.
Yes,
Cool.
yes.
So one of the things that we were talking about, which is actually from the very first line of your book, is that learning math is like learning a new language, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about that. How is math like learning a new language?
So I consider math to be a language. All right. So what do we have in a language? We have grammar, we have rules, we have spelling. Okay. We even have phonics, okay, right? Even though in math we don't consider that a lot, but we do have phonics in math, right? So the same thing happens in math, okay? We have grammar. Let's call one of the simplest rules we usually learn at the beginning of each of our math life, which is the, well, some people, we call it PEMDAS. I know it has different acronyms everywhere, all right? You know, oh, polynomials first, then exponents, then multiplication, right? So we could consider that PEMDAS to be a grammar rule, all right? So you just have to do is follow that rule, and you'll be able to understand what you're reading and speak what you're reading, all right? And when I say speak in math, it's not only telling somebody else, it's also answering the problem. Answering the problem would be considering the speaking part in math, okay? So we have those rules. We have math builds itself, okay? Like you need addition to go to multiplication. You need multiplication to go to exponents. And so the same thing happens with a language, all right? You first learn the basics, then you probably learn the verbs, then the conjugations and so on. But everything you learn, it takes from the very first part. And that's something we say a lot in the book, which is, okay, we learned this, all right? And if we use that in the next chapter, we will tell you, hey, remember this from this chapter? We are using it again, okay? And as I told you, you will always have that dog assisting you and reminding you, like, okay, I know we did this on a previous chapter, but hey, here is how we do it. This is how we did it, okay? We even relate, like the same way we did, let's say you're on problem 80, and we tell you the same way we did on problem 20, we're doing this, and so on and so on. Because that's it. Math is a language. You just have to follow the rules and you'll be able to speak it fluently, right?
Yes, no, that is such a good point. And I think it's really important for students to remember, right, is that math builds on itself. And we see that so clearly with a language, right? Nobody would expect to just pick up a new language and the next day be fluent in it, right?
Exactly.
But so often, you know, students expect that with math. They think that, okay, some people they automatically get it just like that, and they didn't have to learn any of the foundations underneath it. So yeah, remembering to just not disregard the way that math builds upon itself is really important.
Yes.
And I love your other comment. Sorry, I was gonna say, I love your other comment also, you know, just about,
we lost it. We lost it.
It was the first thing that you said.
You need this assistant. I cannot see him because of the resolution of my computer. You need the assistant to remind you.
Remind me, I totally do. No, but I was gonna say, and the other thing that I love that you pointed out is, you know, in the sense of like math being like a language that you speak also, because there is that, like, it's one thing when you're learning a language and you're writing out the words, say, on a workbook, right? And that's a different level of understanding than speaking the language. And I think that's also true in math, which is something I haven't really thought about very much. But there's learning, you know, there's obviously learning as you're reading something and seeing it already done. And there's learning it, being able to do it yourself on paper. And then there's learning it well enough to talk about it.
Exactly.
You know, that is a whole other level of understanding. You know, I really like your point there. Anyways.
One of the biggest fears when you're learning a new language has happened to me when I was learning English. It happened to me when I was learning Portuguese. It hasn't happened to me in Russian because I'm still very young on Russian. But whenever you're learning that speaking part, okay, because you're like, okay, I understand everything, but am I saying it right? Is my accent right? Is people understanding me?
Right.
And same thing happens in math, okay? Many students, they're confident. They're like, okay, I know, I'm just going to use a very simple example. I know what 2 + 2 is, but am I confident enough to like raise my hand and tell the teacher, hey, the answer is 4, right?
Right.
Or go to the board, or in an exam, like writing down, is it really 4? Is it not 5? Okay. So that is, and it takes time. It happens a lot with my students. When I'm teaching them something and I apply a rule, let's say, I don't know the name, I forgot the name of this rule. I think it's the conjugate square, where we have a minus b squared that it turns into a plus b, a minus b. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. Difference of squares, right?
Difference of squares. Thank you. Sometimes I struggle with the change on the rules name because of English or Spanish and everything. So when every single time when I apply that rule, my students are like, how did you come up with that? Okay. And they're scared because they're like, am I going to think about it if I'm on my own? And I always tell them like, hey, the reason this rule comes to my mind is because I've done it like hundreds, thousands of times. So it's already like on a toolbox here in my mind. And I'm like, okay, maybe I could try this. I always tell, I even write it in the book depending on some rules that I apply, I tell them like, hey, it's not something that may come up at first. It may not be your first thought. It's something that comes with practice. Just keep practicing and eventually it'll be in your mind like a red flag, like, hey, I could try the difference of square here.
Yes,
right?
Yes.
So that's the whole. So that's always what I tell my students. That's what I try with the book. Do not be scared. I know sometimes you see the solution and you're like, how did he think of that? But it's just practice. After a lot of practice, you realize, okay, that rule, maybe I could try this rule. Maybe I could try this one, and so on and so on. All right. Same thing with the language. Same thing. When you're learning a new language, you're like, how can I express this question? Then people tell you this is how you do it. And you're like, I would never, ever thought of that. And then after you do it like 3 or 4 times, you're like, okay, I could do it.
Right.
So it's just practice, it's losing the fear and let yourself go.
Yes. And gosh, the difference of squares example is such a good one because students get so confused and thrown off by that specific topic. And I think, yeah, that is one where, there's some students who just sort of, they think instead of math being a skill that you learn, they almost feel like math is like magic, It just sort of like appears. And I feel like the difference of squares is one of those concepts that really makes them think that math is just magical and you have to have some sort of like Harry Potter magic power in order to like understand it. But you're right, the way that you break it down, right, is that just like with the language, you learn about what it is first, right? We're not asking them to magically come up with it and figure it out on their own, right? You learn what the rule is, you see examples, you practice doing it first, right? And then that level of understanding where you're looking at lots of different problems and you see that that's what you use, like that comes last. That's not the very first thing,
Exactly. And that's what I tell my students. That's a big point on the book, showing them that this is not something that is going to come up right away. It's something that takes your time. I did some problems of factorization there, okay, in the book. And, there is a part that factorization that also scares a student when they first see it, is when we reach to that part when the 2 parentheses are equal to each other, all right? And we just write it once and then write whatever is multiplying the parentheses on the other side. Like we put 2 parentheses. Every single time students are like, what? And the reason when I learned that, what I did is, okay, I'll just learn the mechanic. When I learned it, I just learned the mechanic. I got 2 parentheses equal to each other. I write it once and then I write the leftovers outside, okay? And then like 2 or 3 years after in my math life, I realized it was just taking a common factor, okay? But I knew already the mechanic. So that's something I show in the book. I show them the mechanic and then like, okay, now you're familiar with it. This is what is actually happening, okay? Right. So it's like teaching them the mechanics, the rules, like it will take time. Don't worry. We make mistakes. I point out a couple of mistakes as the dog assistant. Like, you will make mistakes. Do not worry. Something, and for you students, if there are students listening to this right now, something that we teachers do is we know what we're teaching in our class, right? So we usually study like the problems we're doing. We know. And that's why for you, it seems like we know everything. All right. It's just we prepare just to avoid mistakes. Sometimes what I do with my students is I pick a problem that I haven't done before just to see if I make a mistake, because sometimes we do it, even with really, really easy problems. And when I make a mistake, I just show them like, oh, sorry, I made a mistake. Let's work out how can we fix them. And I even show them my work process on fixing the mistake. Okay,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
how do I know this is a mistake? And that helps them because they are like, okay, if the teacher makes mistakes, then it's because it happens in math. It happens, all right?
Right,
They're not
right.
expecting me, as you say, it's not expecting me to do some magic stuff and like, oh, it appeared.
Right, right. And
Yes.
it's a good piece of advice actually for teachers also, right? Is don't be afraid if you make a mistake, right? Like don't be really like embarrassed and terrified of that. Because if it happens, it's a really good learning moment for the whole class,
Yes.
And that's really like a cool opportunity to be able to, look at how you make mistakes and let them know that it's okay. And you can show them that mindset that they need to have of figuring it out, not getting down on themselves when it happens. It's a really good learning moment.
Yes, exactly. And if I may add, so in my teachings, okay, when you see students that are, when they get to your class, are really scared of math, and then in a couple of months, they really love it. Like you can hear for the young kids, their parents tell me like, oh, they want to come back. They don't. And the older kids like college and everything, they always looking for math and you see their grades improving. You realize that your method is working, okay? So I was like, when I started writing the book was like, okay, my method is working, but if just me teaching, I cannot cover as many people as I would love to. So I spent a lot of time putting those methods into a book. Okay, I actually have the notebook here in which I started writing it. Okay,
Oh,
this is where it
cool.
all started.
Very cool.
All right. Yes. So it just have hundreds of pages of writings and everything, and erasing and writing back, making sure every single step had this method of showing what is happening, every single detail, as you saw in the book, it has arrows showing how the numbers and x's are moving around. It's telling you it moves as a positive, it moves as a division, okay? Then when something gets complex, you have a pop-up of the dog telling you, hey, this is what happened, don't worry. There are even rules, because this is an algebra, I am working on going to other topics, but for algebra, you need rules of pre-algebra that are not pre-explained in the book. So sometimes these pop-ups will tell you, hey, I use this rule from pre-algebra. For example, addition of fractions, that always scares the students, addition and subtractions of fractions. When you have like x plus 3 over x, and then on the next step, you just combine them and they're like, okay, what happened here? So whenever that happens, it's a pop-up like, hey, this is the operation. We do an addition of fractions, showing everything we have. It's, as I said, it's assisting the students every little single step. And as I mentioned, I'm working on the pre-algebra one. I'm hoping to go all the way to calculus, and I'm hoping to have it in the exact same manner.
Fantastic. No, that's so
Yeah.
cool. I really connect to what you said about, you found something that you were doing that was working. But there's a limit to how much then you can help, because it's just the students that you're working with. And that's sort of what inspired the book. And I think about, so my first book, which was Crush Math Now, was really the same thing. I felt like there were all of these little stories and conversations and, things that I was doing in the classroom or with tutoring students. And I felt like, gosh, they could just help so many students, and I think that you're right. The book is a fantastic way to be able to, share those little pieces of advice that aren't there in every classroom, right? That aren't there in every textbook.
Yes.
And be able to reach students that are outside of your own classroom and, immediate sort of like circle of influence.
Yes, exactly. And that's why currently it's just an ebook, so everybody can have it, right? The advantages of ebooks is, first, it's digital, so it's everywhere.
Yep.
And second, you can lower the price as much as possible, so it's accessible for everybody. Okay.
Right.
So that's why it's an ebook. Sometime I might work on having it a hard copy, but for now it's just an ebook.
Well, I'm going to push you. Yeah, get a hard copy or paperback at some point, because I would
Absolutely,
love a
absolutely.
paperback copy of it.
I'll work on that. Don't worry.
Just to add one extra thing onto your plate, as if you're not busy enough already.
I'll work on that. Yes. And so, yeah, and trying to get as much people as possible is the point.
Mhm.
In the meantime, the other books are made. Well, you've seen my Instagram page. We're posting there like twice, or I know thrice is not a word, but I heard it in a movie and it's funny for me. And every
You
time
like
just
it, yeah.
comes to mind. But twice or thrice a week, we post a couple of methods in English and Spanish, by the way.
Very cool.
Couple
Very
of
cool.
methods. We also post some memes. Okay, so so you just keep it fun and feel free to check it. I know it's on the bullet points, so you will have them. The math user manual is the Instagram page. Okay, it's at math user manual. You will find it. It has the dog. It's the very first picture you will see is the dog. And you can find some of the ideas that we're currently working over there. All right.
Perfect.
Yes.
Okay, so before we totally wrap up though, I know we were talking about math as a language, right? Learning math is sort of like learning a language. Was there anything else that we wanted to talk about there? Because I feel like for students who've learned a new language, right, or have gone through that process and been successful at it, right? That sort of parallel between the two can be really helpful.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. I forget. We were brainstorming beforehand. We were talking about all these different ideas. I know there were a couple that we forgot.
I know you wrote them down.
I know I wrote a couple of them down. I did not write very much down. Okay. So I wrote down practice, which I think we covered that, right? It's just like a language you have to practice in order to get better.
And we have 100
about why, right?
Oh,
I think why you need math is something that gets lost a lot, right?
Yes.
We're sort of saying that, when you're learning a language, right, you're usually learning because you have a reason, right? You're going to go somewhere. There's a reason, maybe there's a reason. You have a motivation for taking on the challenge of learning a new language, right?
Yes.
But so often math is just that requirement, right? It's just required, and so many students are there without knowing why they need it. And so, as a teacher or parent, or even as a student yourself, figuring out why and finding that motivation for why it can help you in the same way that.
Yes, the why is a very important question. I get asked that a lot by my students, like, why am I learning this? Why is this useful? Okay, I always have an example for every single step. I have to admit that my engineering experience helps me with those examples to show them, but not only I show them with engineering stuff, like how this is work, I show them like real life things that math can help them. And yes, the thing is, so as you said, we learn a language because we're going somewhere. We need to speak to somebody, or we have a job, we're interested in a job that requires, for example, my native language is Spanish. I knew that I had to learn English because not only for college, like English is a requirement worldwide for a lot of important jobs, okay? So you have to. With math happens a similar thing, okay? You need math in many of your works, even if you think like, okay, I'm just gonna study medicine, I'm going to be a doctor. Doctors do use math. Okay, they might not use it at a high level like derivatives, integrals, infinite series, but they do use simple algebra stuff when they're calculating the solutions for a patient. They use simple math. Okay, economics, you use math a lot to find a specific price. Even if let's say that you have how do you call it when like your parent leave you a lot of money?
Inheritance.
Inheritance. Yeah. Even if you have a big inheritance and you're not planning to work in your life, all right? Math will be useful.
If you want to hang on to the inheritance, right?
Exactly. If you want to hang on to that, even still, you will need math, because when you're calculating, when the bank tells you about interest, or when the tax or everything, having basic knowledge will help you understand what is actually going on that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And so they're especially relating to that finance, because nobody can escape needing to know math for their own personal finance stuff, whether it's student debt, or saving for a car or a house, or wanting to retire. Like you unfortunately can't.
It's math.
Unfortunately, for those who want to avoid it,
exactly.
You really can't avoid it. It's just like, it is so important for financial security and growth and all of that.
Actually, for anything, time. When you're calculating something with time, what is time? Time is numbers. Numbers is math, okay? You will use it. And sometimes only basic addition, subtraction, multiplication is not enough. Sometimes you need a little bit of algebra to find out, okay, how much time do I need for this? Or like if you're splitting your time in the day, especially in college, we've all of us that been in college, we know time management in college is. I mean, otherwise you'll be at 2 a.m. with 3 assignments due at 7 a.m., right?
Right,
So
right.
so the thing with math is sometimes you apply it without knowing. And having some background, especially in algebra. Algebra, I call it the foundation of everything else, okay? And especially having a foundation in algebra, it will help you like better understand this math that you're doing and you don't know you're doing, okay? So math, whether you like it or not, is part of your life. So this book, it will help you. Not only this, also the pre-algebra one we're working, which is even simpler stuff. It will have even more assistance.
Well, and that's good too, because I mean, that's the foundations, right?
Yes.
For all of the algebra stuff. So I feel like, you know, so often students aren't technically in pre-algebra, but that's the foundational book that helps to set you up for success in algebra. So,
exactly.
So that will be a huge help, I think, to students when that comes out.
And knowing algebra, something that I skipped in the entire time we spent talking, is for those of you that are planning to go majors that require like higher level math, the biggest secret of math is being familiar with pre-algebra and algebra. Everything else builds from there. Everything else is just adding a little extra to the algebra. Derivatives. I know everybody that has to take calculus 1 is scared of that word, derivatives. Derivatives is just a rule, an extra rule that we apply after we do the algebra, okay? So in many derivative problems, you will do a lot of algebra and then like, okay, now I can apply the derivative, which is just a nice and easy rule, okay? What in this, from my own experience, from my classmates' experience, from my students, usually what they get wrong on derivatives and integrals, that's also scary for a lot of people, is not the integral derivative part, it's the algebra part, okay? So having the foundation on this pre-algebra and algebra, for those of you that are going to higher level math, it'll make it like 1,000 times easier for you. Because as I said, it's just adding an extra rule to what you already learned. Okay. Right.
Definitely. Oh, that's perfect. That's like the perfect thought to end on. I love that.
Perfect.
Awesome. So actually, so before we go, then can you tell us again where people can find your book and follow you, all those things?
Absolutely. So currently the ebook is available on Amazon. All you have to do is search for Algebra User Manual. You will see 2 editions. I call the second one an international one because we changed a little bit of the pictures. And so the beanie on the first one had the flag of my country. The second one is more like international versions. Okay, so you will find both of them. They have the same content, by the way. Feel free to get whichever you want. Hopefully it'll be available soon. I cannot tell you how much time. It'll be available soon on Google Library, I think is the name of that. When you buy book, I cannot tell you the date yet. Hopefully soon. I'll definitely let people know through my Instagram, which is @math_user_manual. Okay, so @math_user_manual. You'll find my Instagram page where I'm posting news about the book. I'm posting some basic knowledge in math everywhere in Singapore. People feel I've received message of people that find it really helpful, all those tips that I'm teaching. And of course, some memes because we have to keep it fun.
Perfect.
Yes. And as I said, any news on the books and any other material that I'll be releasing, the very first place you will find out is that page.
Is on Instagram. Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here today. It was a joy to read your book, and it was so much fun to talk to you about it today.
It was really fun for me. I enjoyed this interview. It was amazing. It was one of the best interviews I had in the past like 8 months.
Oh, thank you. Well, this was super fun.
Yes.
Totally enjoyable. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. And if you're listening to this interview today, thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.